All right, we are sans Mason today, so it's just
Right,
the two
we're
of
playing
us.
a man down. I think he got a
That's
red card or something.
he's fighting an illness. He'll be back with us next week, but that's never stopped us from having a 30-minute convo. So whatever.
That's right. You just have the sexy deep voice when you got a cold.
Okay, so this week, it's funny because it seems like you start getting into the different miracles of Jesus's ministry. You know, we had a bunch last week. We got a bunch more this week. There could be a tendency of getting lost, in all the different miracles and not seeing the whys behind or the whats. So I think the curriculum does a pretty good job at it. Like last week's miracles, they approach it differently than this week's miracles. So I was telling you, Ryan, before we started, these are some of my favorite chosen episodes when we start looking at these. But these
Yeah,
are
one of them is a 2 episode arc, isn't
that's
it?
right. I mean, I'm automatically looking at how I would approach this. This would be one of those weeks where I would say this week's theme is faith in Jesus, like faith in His ability to save, or faith that Jesus can, and like fill in the blank, because each of these stories can just be a different approach to the same thing. And I think the curriculum kind of writes it that way. So
I,
I
I
don't
would
know.
also say that this is a good week to really focus on the intent of the authors, to be very deliberate in saying, all right, so Mark is writing with this purpose in mind. Matthew is writing with this purpose in mind. And if we need to review that part of it, Mark is the first of the gospel authors. He's the first one that's collecting these stories. And his intent is to demonstrate the works and sayings of Jesus. So he's very much more about the details of what Jesus did. He does do some of the sermonizing, but it's the miracles of Jesus. It's who he is as this divine being, but what he did specifically. Where
Right.
Matthew is trying to make the connection to ancient Moses, and Jesus is this new Moses, with the laws and all the different imagery of going into a mount and those kinds of things. Luke is the Gentile among the group. I guess Mark is, I think we think Mark is a Gentile, but Luke is writing specifically to a Gentile audience, talking about where Matthew is kind of emphasizing fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. Luke is looking at it from more of a universal standpoint of he is a savior for all. And then John's on his own. He's on his own plane, right? John's doing his own thing, which is why week to week we're going to get just John
Right.
and then the other three kind of
Yeah,
together.
you'll get the synoptics this week, and then John on his own. John is definitely writing to the initiated, right? Those who
Right.
know. So you can in these, even though they combine Mark and Matthew in the first lesson, then Mark by itself. You could just focus on Mark 5:24 through 34 there and that part. In fact, it probably flows better. I think in the
Well,
curriculum.
the details are more complete, right?
Right, right.
We get
Then in
more of
Matthew.
the conversation. We get more motive in some of the things that we see from Mark. Matthew just kind of almost tells it as if like, okay, this happened. It's only 3 verses, right? Matthew only gives it to us in 3 verses, where Mark does it in 10.
Right. So let's talk. So we kind of have a little bit of a miracle sandwich going on in these chapters. So if we were to approach this like we're going to teach it, um, with questions of faith to be answered here, and here you have the beginning of a miracle in the middle of it, and then the ending of the first miracle. I mean, so go where you would go as you're kind of looking at the themes here. So how would you approach this one?
It's a good question. I think, and that's kind of why I started with this idea of intent, author intent is, Mark is very clearly trying to show something about Jesus, where he starts with responding to a Jewish leader, a man,
Right.
somebody who is high up in authority, that is making a request of Jesus, and Jesus is he's no respect of persons. He's gonna go to wherever he sees the faith. But I think the intent of the author is to show that it's almost like there's this we call it a foil. It's a literary foil where you're going to compare two stories side by side. And so here you got one group where you got this, again, this powerful Jewish leader, high up in authority, a man, and then you have a woman. If you could do the exact opposite of who Jairus is, you're going to get this woman who is a social outcast because of her medical condition, um, and and I think what Mark is saying is that the Savior is going to stop. And it doesn't matter who the person is, he's always going to respond. And there's obviously some lessons for Jairus, but I don't know, is now a good time to share my image?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I found this painting in the BYU Museum of Art. And the title of the painting is "Woman Taken with an Issue of Blood," or "Woman with Issue of Blood." Now, as you look at this image, maybe I just invite you to just tell me, where do your eyes go first?
I mean, for me, it's the one in the center of the picture, right?
Kind of
The
with
only
his
one,
eyes downcast.
the only one that's facing me, but is looking down into the side.
Right.
But
Now
then,
you can see Christ next to him.
yeah, I was gonna say very quickly though, you realize there's only one person looking at the one in the middle. Like,
Now, if you look closer at this painting, the one that your eye is drawn to, go down,
yeah,
you see a woman with a hood over her face.
yeah, because the one in the middle that looks like Jarius. Does it? Does it not? Is that what you would say?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, if I were to interpret, but the painting is designed to show us how invisible this
Yeah.
woman felt.
Yeah, she's down here.
That in this crowd of people and the press and all the, and our eyes are going towards Jairus. He's, again, the authority figure, this person who is a leader in the group. We don't see this poor woman who has been suffering for 12 years. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just this beautiful illustration of how easy it is for members of our community in their suffering to feel like they're invisible, to feel like they're really their only hope, because they don't have the social they don't have the social chutzpah. They don't have the cachet. They don't have the to be able to ask Jesus for this very special thing to go heal his daughter. Her only thought is, look, I'm invisible. If he can get close enough and I can just touch him, that's all. I am the lowest of the low in this story. Nobody sees me. And in fact, even when Jesus passes by, right, in that beautiful conversation of, well, who touched me?
Right.
And he acknowledged she is not invisible to him, when everybody else, like, what do you mean, who touched you? There's hundreds of people here.
Yeah.
And he says, I perceive that virtue has gone out of me. I have felt power healing somebody. And we shouldn't take that as a sign that Jesus doesn't know when he's healing us. He's very much cognizant, but I think it was a teaching moment. And there's multiple teaching. There's like layers of teaching in this story, but I just love that imagery that, and I think there's where your relevance is going to be, is you may feel like you're invisible, but none of us are invisible to him.
Yeah, that's a really great. I have next to these verses because it's always really great to start off with an image like that can actually generate conversation about what's happening. So that's a ready-made discussion for your class. And maybe to even demonstrate a little bit more, I've got Leviticus 15:19 through 23 written in the margins here. And that's the actual purification laws of the law of Moses, talking about so after you have the whole conversation about the painting and how unseen this woman is, you can add layers to it too. Not only is she unseen by those in her society, but how she could be feeling towards her the commandments and the law of Moses that she is, you know, that she is religiously trying to follow, how much she feels like an outcast by virtue of the system that's placed before her, right? So it's not just that the community is not watching her, that nobody sees her, but she could, in a very real way, feel like God's not even watching her, because it's because of the law of Moses that she has really suffered these 12 years. Not just the issue of blood, but because she is bleeding, she is unclean, and any clothes she touches is unclean. Anything she sits on is unclean. People who touch her are unclean. So these 12 years are 12 years of isolation, of being cast out, not recognized, fill in the blank. So
Utter suffering.
yeah, utter suffering. And so I like how you can start with the idea of being unseen, because I think a lot of our youth can feel that. They feel that for different reasons. There's a reason why identity politics are so powerful today, because our youth are thirsty to be seen.
Yeah,
And
to be acknowledged in a community.
they will to be validated in some way. Sometimes they're doing and saying things that they don't even really believe, but because it helps them join a community, they're doing it. And so, what a relevant thing to start with, of somebody who is unseen in the story and how that comes up. So, it's interesting how we are splitting these two stories between days. You will probably want to like somehow sketch out the time frame, right? Starts here, it goes to this miracle, then it ends here. You're going to have to do that at the beginning, just so you can then talk about the place, the settings that it's in, right?
Right. We lose. I know that with some of the changes in our teaching manuals, and how the new curriculum is structured, we those 5 steps of teaching, especially the establishing of content and context. I
Kind of
just I
hard to
just have
do
my
that.
pre-service director, his words just echoing in my mind. It's like, if you can do content and context so well, then the rest of it just flows so easily. They will pull the principles out. They will pull out how it applies to them. They'll pull, and yeah, we just have to be so good at understanding, like Leviticus. It's not in any of the cross references. It's not in any of the footnotes,
Not.
but understanding that this isn't just that, that she's been menstruating for 12 years, and it's not just that she's lost all her money because doctors have probably taken advantage of it. And it's not just, but there's this deeply religious thing that has caused her, and so blended into the mass of the people that they've just stopped paying attention to her.
Yeah.
She's just gone.
Yeah.
She's just, to them, she doesn't even exist.
So if focusing on, day one of this kind of series of stories, it really does focus on the woman and her efforts to reach Jesus for healing. Like that's the focus, it seems, in this one is, her faith has led her to, if I can just touch the hem, right, or the corner of his robe, which, it's not like he's got, the Bible video doesn't do it justice. It's not like Jesus is walking around with this big old flowing, robe that's like layers, but the corner, the hems of his clothing, are symbolic. And
Yep.
even in the Bible dictionary, it mentions that the tassel is what she's reaching for, which were prayer tassels, or symbolic of the law of Moses. And, the colors are symbolic, according to the Bible dictionary, to heaven. And she's just, it's that President Nelson quote, she is stretching to get Jesus. And oftentimes that faithful spiritual stretching is what demonstrates to God our desire and our intent. And that's what leads to the healing moment. So then you shift gears and then you go to the man, Jairus, and they focus in that second one on verse 36. Be not afraid, only believe. And it's almost like Jesus will like stretch this one out so that there's like
Yeah, because what is Jairus thinking this whole time?
yeah.
Like, hey, let's move this on. Right. That's right.
So there's, but it's different than this miracle. Like the nuanced differences between the healings here are interesting. This one is definitely, the woman is pushing and stretching and making it happen. And Jairus does go and find Jesus. So there's an element of this, but Jesus is delayed and, on purpose is delayed until the daughter is dead, right? And there's this whole, okay, now what is if we were to take that little nugget and let the light refract, what's the difference between this story and that story? And
and that might be a good conversation for day 2 is let's go similarities and differences.
yeah, you can almost like draw a line on the board and say, here's everything we learned about the woman with the issue of blood. Now let's analyze what's different in this story.
Let's look at these 2 stories again, content and context. Let's tell this story. Now you identify, where do we see similarities in the 2 stories and where do we see differences, and why are those similarities and differences important? What do they teach us about Christ's character?
Yeah, what does it teach us about God's timeline on
Yeah.
on blessings?
Put yourself in the place of the woman.
Right.
What are you thinking? Put yourself in the place. Jairus has only got to wait 10 minutes, right? He's only been waiting 10 minutes. She's been waiting 12 years.
Right. Well, and even the fact that if he didn't wait those 10 minutes, now his opportunity's gone. Like, how often do we actually put God into our own little time box?
We
yeah,
kind of box
where
him
we're
up
like, this miracle must happen here. And if it doesn't happen here, then I don't get the miracle, or the miracle won't work, or whatever it is. And it's almost like Jesus is like purposefully saying, you cannot put my healing power in your kind of created box.
Yeah, I think this is where you could probably use that Michael McLean video.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not called Mormon inspirational messages.
Hold on, I'll give the title. Keep talking about it.
And just kind of when we go through our own faith crises, oftentimes the faith crisis is because we have mismanaged expectations. That word expectation tends to have a lot of weight to it. And oftentimes that's like a normal thing just in any relationship. When we are not very good at managing expectations in a professional relationship, in a romantic relationship, in a familial relationship, and in a relationship with God, when we don't understand those expectations, it can really cause problems, because as soon as we think, yep, this is how I receive revelation, yep, this is how I receive answers to my prayers, this is how God speaks to me,
and it didn't happen according to the way that
it didn't happen according to my expectations, he must not be there now.
Yep.
And it's such a myopic way to look at it.
So the video is called Faith Crisis, What Do We Do When We Feel Nothing? It's from 4 years ago with Michael McLean. So that could be a really interesting conversation with your youth to kind of see the differences. Now, I do want to get to the next part because we're probably running out of time, but you actually have a couple days in a row that is going to be focused on the role of apostleship and spokespersons, those who are called and sent forth to go. And I
would say this is the part of The Chosen that was not amongst my favorites.
See, you have an issue with it. I'm okay with it. This is definitely where we get to the part where
I like them on their missions, but it doesn't seem like there's too terribly much.
You're stuck on the laying on of hands and the transfer of authority, which is fine, right? Like, and that's why some people, anyway. But I do love how we are in Matthew 9, where he actually says, go. And he then tells them, preach the kingdom and then heal people. and he actually gives them his authority and says, I need you to go out and do everything you just saw me do. Teach them the things I taught you, and go and perform and do the works that I have done. And that is actually the part I do like about the episode, or the chosen version of this, is it goes through, and I tell my kids, like, we actually did it on Sunday where we watched, we the part where they're called, and then the part where they actually go and do it. And it's really great in the scriptures where they come back and they're like, it worked.
It
Like,
worked.
everything worked. With the blind saw, the deaf heard, and even the spirits, the demons obeyed our word. And just watching it on film, I told my kids, I was like, listen, if you want to taste a little bit of what the mission feels like, this is it. Even getting called and being told to go out, and those feelings of, oh, I don't know if I can do this, and I have that authority. Are you sure I have that authority? And then going out and doing. Now, that's not the point of the curriculum. The point of the curriculum is apostles.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily we have that power. We do. I'm not saying that we don't. But this is definitely a focus on priesthood keys that are given to the 12 to go and do the work that is uniquely theirs to go and
One of the things that you may want to do is, we want to, maybe we want to use the Book of Mormon a little bit more. If we go to First Nephi 11 and we just kind of look at this first part of Nephi's vision where he sees the ministry of Christ, mm-hmm. and after the death of Christ, that he's slain for the sins of the world. It's interesting that one of the things that Nephi points out that is a major contributor to the scattering of Israel is starting in verse 34, that after he was slain, I saw the multitudes of the earth, that they were gathered together to fight against the apostles of the Lamb. For thus were called the 12 called by the angel of the Lord. And the multitude of the earth was gathered together, and I beheld that they were in a large and spacious building. Interesting that's when Nephi sees the large and spacious building, like unto the building which my father saw. And the angel of the Lord spake unto me again, saying, behold, the world and the wisdom thereof, yea, behold, the house of Israel. Now that's interesting, that it's the house of Israel hath gathered together to fight against the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And I saw that, I bear record that the great and spacious building was the pride of the world, and it fell, and the fall was exceedingly great. Thus the angel spake, thus shall be the destruction of all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people that shall fight against the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And a good question would be, why is the fall coming after the rejection of the apostles and not after the rejection of the Christ? And, and I don't know if I have a really good answer for that. But it is interesting to me that it seems like Christ is willing to, like, yeah, whatever you're going to do to me, great. But man, if you're going to do things to my servants, my prophets, my apostles, it seems like there's almost a bigger, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It just seems like the consequences to rejecting his witnesses, his servants, those that he is called to be in these very critical positions, like it almost seems like it's a little more of a severe punishment.
I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I will say there is a definite connection between faith in Jesus Christ and a trust in the keys he's bestowed to men on earth. Just as much a connection there as there is a lack of trust in keys bestowed to men on earth, and the lack of faith in Jesus Christ. So I think you would find few and far between people who have an intact faith that is not somehow hurt or kind of strengthened because of experiences with those who have been called to serve and do the things. And that's actually one of the lessons. It gets really personal. Like there's a couple of places where you can do some self-assessments, and I strongly agree, neutral, or disagree. And then there's a couple of statements. I believe the apostles of Jesus Christ are important. Do you agree? disagree, right? I want to hear what the Savior's apostles have to say, and I pay attention when I have the chance to listen to them. I could share one, like it gets to the nitty gritty here. And I love how they actually have one of the temple recommend questions right here. It's like, listen, we're not messing around here. Do you sustain members of the first presidency, quorum of 12 apostles, the prophets, seers, and revelators? And I think a really good question is, why do we feel like that is a requirement for entering the temple?
The fourth question asked. After faith in Jesus Christ, after faith in God, Jesus Christ, restoration.
Yep. And then it's President Nelson, quorum of the 12, local
Yep.
leaders. And that's interesting because I feel like we draw weird lines sometimes, but this lesson doesn't let you draw any weird lines. So I guess what I'm saying is prepare for there is a potential for a bit of a bumpy ride here. So make sure that you're coming back to the scriptures as often as you can with this, because you may have people who have feelings about living prophets, seers, and revelators. They still go to church. You may have kids whose parents have some feelings about this. So make sure you're tying it back to the word, and you are inviting the Spirit as much as possible so that you can stand and deliver truth. As we learned in the last broadcast, deliver the truth bathed in love, because there's going to be a spectrum of feelings towards living prophets. That's kind of my thing today. I don't know. Am I projecting a concern, Ryan, or is that?
No, those are legitimate concerns. It's a world that we live in that we tend to hold the humanity and imperfection of prophets and apostles against them.
Right.
And anyone that's ever sat has ever been with them. My first kind of real experience being in a leadership meeting with an apostle was with Elder Holland in 2016. And I went into this meeting very, very excited, but kind of intimidated at the same time, because it was just bishops, it was just stake presidents and stake presidencies, and we're going to have this 4 hours with Elder Holland where he was going to train us. And so I went in with this expectation that somewhere the Spirit was going to testify to me that he is a special witness. And I've had other experiences where I just have always known that. But I went into this with, all right, so the Spirit's going to teach something to me. And it was when Elder Holland was talking about pipes and plumbing in buildings. Like, it was just something so innocent and he was just like, yeah, we build these buildings and we, the plumbing. And it was at that moment when we're talking about pipes that the Spirit said, special witness of Jesus Christ. And I was like, what a weird place for the Spirit to testify of this. And I wrote in my journal, and I kind of copied those notes, and I've reflected on it a few times. And I come to the conclusion that sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes we can get caught up in the emotion, right? When an apostle is testifying and bearing witness, of course, the Spirit is going to witness to us, because he's testifying of Christ. That is the primary role of an apostle, is to be a witness of Jesus Christ. And so we might get caught up in the emotion that might lead us to thinking, but was it really? And then this time it was like the Spirit was being very clear with me, Ryan, you need to know he's an apostle while we're talking about pipes.
Right.
It needs to be this innocuous kind of thing that there can be no doubting that that the Spirit is testifying this is a special witness of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so we need to learn to trust that. And even though I think I may have kind of referenced Adam Miller's quote about prophets, that the only thing scarier than thinking that God doesn't work through imperfect people the only thing scarier to think that God works through imperfect people is to think that he doesn't.
Yeah, right.
Right. Meaning, if he can't work through an imperfect and even a prophet that's even President Nelson has acknowledged, I'm not exactly where God wants me to be. That's why he still repents daily. Man, what a miss if we think that we have to expect perfection from them, to trust that when they give us counsel, that are we, is it just advice, personal advice, or is there doctrine? And I don't care. I just want to be like him, because
Right.
he's trying to be closer to the Savior.
All right, we
Anyway,
probably
those are
ought
my
to end it
thoughts.
there. We're at the end here. This is going to be a good week. I feel it. These are really great stories that are easily relevant to our youth. So enjoy.